Most people in my neighborhood thought they knew exactly who I was. To them, I was just old Frank Nolan, the retiree with oil on his hands and a rusted pickup that coughed blue smoke when it climbed the hill. They saw me in the same faded flannel shirts, the same work boots with the soles worn smooth, pushing a cart down the aisles at the grocery store, or standing in my little tool shed behind the house, stripping down an engine just to see if I still remembered how. They saw the surface and assumed that was all there was. If you had looked through my front window that Thanksgiving afternoon, you would have seen exactly what they expected to see too: an old man at the head of a long table, carving a turkey while his family laughed and passed the potatoes. A modest, well-kept house, the good china taken down from the hutch, the football game murmuring from the living room. My wife, Margaret, moving between the table and the stove with the quiet grace of a woman who has spent 40 years making these days feel effortless. It smelled like my childhood in there. Sage and butter and roasted bird. The faint scent of yeast rolls. I watched my 8-year-old grandson, Max, try to sneak an olive from the relish tray when he thought no one was looking. My teenage granddaughter, Lily, was pretending she wasn't watching the game while she scrolled on her phone. Everything looked exactly right. Margaret's back brushed my shoulder as she leaned in to set down the gravy boat. She smiled at me, that small, tired smile that still knocked the breath out of my chest after all these years. I watched her finger reach up, as it always did, and checked the little flesh-colored device tucked behind her ear. Her hearing aids. Her medals of honor. 10 years earlier, twisted steel and broken glass had stolen most of her hearing when she'd thrown herself over our daughter in a wreck on the interstate. Claire had walked away without a scratch. Margaret had never heard a birdsong the same since. Every time I saw those tiny devices, I didn't see weakness. I saw the price she paid to keep our girl alive. Claire sat halfway down the table, next to her husband. She still had Margaret's eyes, green and watchful, but lately there was something dimmer in them, like the light behind them had been turned down. Next to her, with his shirt sleeves rolled up and his tie already loosened, was Dylan. Dylan had his third glass of wine in one hand and the whole room in the other. At least, that's what he thought. He gestured with his fork as he talked, the cuff of his designer shirt flashing an expensive watch every time he moved. His voice rose and fell theatrically, filling the little dining room like he was holding court in some private club instead of in my old house with the squeaky floorboards. "You should have seen their faces when I walked into that pitch," he said, laughing. "This tech outfit from out west thinks they can just drop into our market and tell us how it's done. They don't know I've been working that district for years. When this hub deal closes, I'll be overseeing the whole downtown portfolio." "That sounds like a lot of responsibility," Margaret said. She always tried to encourage people, even when they were just blowing smoke. She leaned forward a little, as she does when the room gets noisy and the words start slipping away from her. "You said you're buying a what, dear?" The room went a little quieter. The game hummed softly from the other room, crowd noise like distant surf. I saw the way Dylan's jaw twitched just a little. He set his glass down harder than he needed to. "I said," he repeated, dragging out the vowels. "We're buying into a downtown tech hub project, Margaret. Big office redevelopment. But the real play is equity. Ownership." He grinned, showing a row of very white teeth. "Once I line up the right guarantor, it's basically free money." I had to keep my eyes on my plate so I wouldn't laugh. There was a bitter humor to it, the boy bragging about a project on land I knew better than my own palm, talking about needing a wealthy backer, while he stabbed at his stuffing in my dining room. "Sorry, dear," Margaret said, blinking. "I caught the buying part, but not the rest. Is it an apartment?" Dylan let out a long, theatrical sigh. He rolled his eyes toward the ceiling like a teenager asked to take out the trash. Then he looked at Claire, a crooked smile pulling at one corner of his mouth. "Watch this," he said, though he didn't say it out loud. I saw it in the way his lips formed the words. He turned back to Margaret. He moved his mouth, big, exaggerated shapes like a bad actor in a silent movie. His jaw went up and down, his tongue flicked, his teeth flashed, but no sound came out. Margaret's brow furrowed. She tapped her hearing aid with the tip of one finger, the way she does when she thinks it might have slipped. Her cheeks went a shade paler. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaking just a little. Asmai, was this thing off? Dylan exploded with laughter. Not a chuckle, not a slip of amusement. A full, barking howl that made the gravy ripple in the boat. Oh my God, you should have seen your face, he crowed. Relax, Mum, I was just messing with you. I wasn't saying anything. Thought your hardware had finally given up. He slapped the table, still laughing. Maybe it's not the ears, he said loudly. Maybe the brain's buffering too, huh? The sound hit me in the chest like a fist. For a second, I wasn't in my dining room anymore. I was back on the shoulder of the interstate, smelling gasoline and burned rubber, watching Margaret being loaded into an ambulance with blood matting her hair, unable to hear the paramedic asking her name while Claire screamed her lungs out and didn't have a single broken bone. At that table, Margaret's hand trembled where it hovered near her ear. She let it drop, slowly, as if it weighed 100 pounds. She tried to smile, the way polite people do when they're the butt of a joke and everyone else seems to think it's funny. Across the table, I lifted my eyes to my daughter. I waited for her to say something. To jab Dylan with her elbow and say, "That's enough." To look at her mother, whose body had been the shield that day on the highway, and defend her. Claire kept her gaze fixed on her mashed potatoes. Her fork traced little furrows through the gravy. After a beat too long, she gave a weak little laugh that died almost as soon as it was born. Dylan, don't, she muttered. It's fine, Mom, the fine. I heard my heart beating in my ears. I felt the old anger push up from somewhere deep in my spine, cold and clean. I didn't raise my voice. Men like me don't have to. We spend our lives around engines and steel. We learn that you don't need to shout when you're holding the wrench. I set my knife and fork down on the plate. The sound of metal on porcelain cut straight through Dylan's laughter. It sliced through the TV noise, through Lily's rapid tapping on her phone, through the clink of Max's glass as he took another sip of milk. Everyone looked at me. Is the turkey too dry, Frank? Dylan said, still half smiling. I stood up slowly. My chair scraped back on the hardwood floor. I'm not as strong as I once was, but a lifetime of hauling transmissions and axles leaves its mark. When I put my hands on the table and leaned in, the wood creaked. Get out, I said. For a second, no one moved. Excuse me. Dylan's smile faltered. You heard me, I said. My voice didn't shake. Get out of my house. Claire gasped. Dad, what are you doing? It's Thanksgiving. He was just. I turned my head and looked her dead in the eye. He mocked your mother's injury, I said quietly. He mocked the price she paid so you could be sitting here today. And you laughed along. This dinner is over. Dylan pushed back his chair so fast it nearly toppled. Are you serious? He snapped. The charm was gone from his face. In its place was something small and mean. You're really throwing us out over a joke. Sensitive old man much. He grabbed his napkin and flung it on the plate, splattering cranberry sauce across the white linen. You know, this is exactly why we don't come around more, he went on. You can't take a bit of fun. You're bitter and broke and stuck in the past. I walked around the table, past the cooling turkey and the untouched pie, and went to the front door. My hand found the familiar curve of the brass knob. I opened it wide. Cold November air rushed in, carrying the smell of dead leaves and distant chimney smoke. You mocked the woman who saved your wife's life, I said. You insulted her for something that was done to her, not something she chose. You don't get to stay in my home after that, not for another minute. Dylan stared at me, breathing hard. Then he snorted. You know what? He said. Fine. We were going to talk to you about that guarantor loan anyway, but forget it. Enjoy your little pension, Frank. When Claire and I are in a real house and I'm running half this city, you can sit here with your cold turkey and your broken-down truck. He jabbed a finger at my chest as he stepped toward the door. Think about this when you don't see Max at Christmas, he said. You'll regret this when you need me to help you with your finances, old man. I didn't move. I just stepped aside. Come on, Claire, he barked. Claire hesitated for a heartbeat. She looked from him to her mother, who was staring down at her plate, hands covering her ears as if she could block the whole scene out. Then she stood up, chair legs screeching, and hurried after her husband. I'll call you Dad, she whispered as she passed me, eyes fixed on the floor. The door shut behind them with a dull thud, Their footsteps crunched down the path, then faded. Through the frosted glass, I watched Dylan's shiny car reverse out of my driveway and disappear down the street. The house went very quiet. I turned back to the table. Margaret hadn't moved. Her shoulders were shaking. Her fingers were pressed over the little devices behind her ears, as if she could push them right out of her skull. "I'm sorry, Frank," she whispered. "I ruined dinner." I went to her and wrapped my arms around her thin shoulders. I kissed the soft white hair at the crown of her head. "You did nothing wrong," I said. My throat burned. "He did. And I promise you this, Margaret, that man will never treat you like that again. Not in my house, not in my life." Outside, a gust of wind rattled the bare branches. Somewhere down the hill a car horn blared and then was gone. I looked at the empty driveway and felt something settle inside me. Dylan had made a mistake that night. Not just by opening his mouth, but by believing his own story. He thought he'd been insulting a worn-out mechanic living on fumes and sentiment. He'd forgotten that underneath the oil stains and the old truck, there was a man who knew exactly what land he stood on. He thought I was just an old man at the head of a small table. He had no idea who really owned the ground under his feet. After the door shut behind them and the house fell quiet, I stood there for a moment with my hand on the knob, feeling the grain of the wood under my thumb. The anger was still hot, but underneath it something older was stirring. Something that felt like grief. Not just for what had happened at that table, but for the long road that had led us here. People see the last few miles of your life and think that's the whole journey. They see the rust on the truck and assume it was always that way. They don't see the miles already on the odometer. I grew up in a 2-room house that shook every time a freight train went by. My father worked nights down at the rail yard, humping cargo in all weather, lungs full of diesel. My mother took in laundry until her hands were raw. We didn't have much, but we had rules. You said, "Sir," and "Ma'am." You respected people who had earned their scars. When I was 15, Dad slipped on a patch of oil and wrenched his back so badly he never really stood straight again. The day after he came home from the hospital, I put on his work boots and went down to the freight depot myself. I lied about my age and told them I could swing a wrench as well as any man. They let me start on nights, cleaning bays and hauling chains. School didn't survive that change. I lasted another year of falling asleep at my desk before I dropped out entirely. I learned to read manifests and repair cracked housings long before I ever read a novel cover to cover. I didn't mind. There was a strange satisfaction in bringing dead machinery back to life. If you listened long enough, an engine would tell you what was wrong. In my early 20s, I scraped together enough to buy a beat-up flatbed and started taking small hauling jobs on the side. Broken-down rigs would limp into the yard, and I'd tow their trailers the rest of the way, or fix them right there in the mud. One truck turned into two into four. I spent more time under vehicles than on my own couch. Then there was Margaret. She came into the depot one icy morning with a first aid kit in one hand and a clipboard in the other. The company had finally decided they needed a nurse on site for all the men who thought they were tougher than gravity. She walked into that dirty break room like sunlight into a cave. Practical shoes, plain blue sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup I could see. Her smile was small but real. She didn't flinch at the grease or the language. The first time she patched up my knuckles, she scolded me like a schoolboy for not wearing gloves. "You're going to need these hands when you're old," she said, dabbing antiseptic on a split knuckle. "Don't spend them all before you're 30. "I don't plan on getting old," I joked. She gave me a look that could have stopped a train. We courted slowly. Coffee instead of bars. Walks along the river instead of movies. She didn't care that my shirt smelled of oil if I'd washed my hands before holding hers. When we finally married, our reception was in the church basement with sandwiches my mother made. Margaret never once complained. We saved. God, how we saved. Every extra shift I took, every double she worked at the clinic, we tucked away. We shared a tiny rental with sagging floors and a stove that only worked on 3 burners. We told ourselves, one little house, one good life. That's all we need. Claire came along 3 years in. She was so small I was afraid to hold her at first. I'd look at my big, scarred hands and then at that little bundle, and I'd feel like a bear cradling a songbird. Margaret would laugh and settle the baby against my chest anyway. You work too hard, Dad. Claire told me once when she was about 8, sitting on the garage floor sorting bolts into jars while I rebuilt a carburetor. One day I'll buy you a new truck so you can relax. I don't need a new truck, I said, tightening a bolt. I just want you to stand tall on your own 2 feet. That'll be enough for me. We did without a lot to make that happen. When her classmates went to Disney World, Claire went to the public library and the park. When the other parents were upgrading kitchens, we were patching her shoes and paying tuition at the little private school, where the teachers still sent home handwritten notes. College fund instead of cruises. Overtime instead of eating out. The accident stole into that life the way tragedies always do, on an ordinary day that didn't look any different until it did. A blown tire on the highway, a jackknife truck. The screaming of metal and 1,000 tiny glass daggers flying through the air. Claire was 16, sulking in the back seat, because we wouldn't let her stay out past midnight. When the trailer started to topple toward our lane, Margaret didn't think. She just turned and threw herself over our daughter. The windshield exploded. By the time the car stopped spinning, Margaret's eardrums were shredded by the blast. Claire didn't have a scratch on her. In the emergency room, with machines beeping and the taste of copper in my mouth, I watched a doctor lean close to Margaret's bandaged head and enunciate, too loudly, that her hearing might never be the same. Claire stood in the corner shaking. I'll take care of you when you're old, Mom, she sobbed later at Margaret's bedside, clutching her hand. I promise. I swear it. And hearing aids came after that. Margaret hated them at first, said they made her feel broken. One night, sitting at the kitchen table, she turned them over in her fingers. They're not pretty, she said, with a little shrug, but they let me hear your voice. That's enough. By then the business had grown beyond greasy driveways. I'd bought a small yard out by the river to park my trucks. Later, when a neighboring warehouse went under, I took a risk and bought that too. Turned it into storage. 1 industrial lot became 3, then 5. Old brick factories nobody wanted turned into solid investments if you trusted that people would always need somewhere to put things. When the city started talking about revitalizing the riverfront, I was already there. A developer offered to buy me out. Instead, I offered him a partnership. We turned one of my oldest warehouses into office lofts. It was the seat of what they now call the Innovation Corridor. I sold the trucking side eventually. Bad back. Tired bones. But I held onto the land and the buildings through a holding company with a plain name that didn't have Nolan anywhere on the paperwork. I'd seen what money did to people. I watched cousins tear each other apart over an insurance payout that barely bought a used car. I saw men at the depot work 30 years only to have their sons treat them like walking wallets. I made up my mind early. If I ever had anything worth fighting over, I'd keep it quiet. So I kept my old truck. I kept my flannels. When people asked how retirement was, I said, can't complain, and left it at that. Claire knew I'd done all right, but not how well. I wanted her to teach because she loved kids, not because she was killing time until a check arrived. For a while, it worked. She rented a little apartment, drove a cheap used car, dated men who brought flowers from the supermarket instead of jewelry bought on credit. Then she met Dylan at a friend's wedding. He arrived in her life the way a shiny car pulls up next to you at a light. Loud, bright, impossible to ignore. Real estate, he said like it was a magic word. He talked about leverage and portfolios, and the way the city was ripe for disruption. Claire's eyes sparkled when she repeated his stories at our kitchen table. At first, I tried to withhold judgment. Ambition isn't a sin. But slowly, I watched little things change. The sensible sedan was traded in for something German and leased. Dinners shifted from casseroles at home to photos of cocktails on social media. Claire went from talking about her students to talking about Dylan's clients and his brand. She still came around, but there was a distance, a defensiveness that hadn't been there before. If I asked a simple question, "Are you two saving anything?" her shoulders would tense. "Dylan knows what he's doing, Dad," she'd say. The first time Dylan asked how much we still owed on the house, I laughed it off. The first time he asked about our wills, about plans, I felt something cold brush the back of my neck. Looking back now, I can see the signs as clearly as a check engine light. At the time, I wanted to believe my daughter had just married a man who talked too much. I didn't yet understand how far he'd go, or how close he'd already come to the thing I had spent 50 years building and hiding. That was before the jokes about Margaret's hearing started. Before the papers appeared on my kitchen table. Before I realized that the downtown tech hub project Dylan bragged about was rising up on pilings sunk into my own dirt. The thing about lines is, you hardly ever see them the first time they're crossed. You tell yourself it's a one and off, a bad day, a slip of the tongue. By the time you realize it's a pattern, the ruts are already worn into the road. The first time Dylan laughed at Margaret's hearing, it was summer, not Thanksgiving. The grill was going in the backyard, fat hissing on the coals, and the air smelled of cut grass and lighter fluid. Max was running through the sprinkler in his swimsuit, shrieking every time the cold water hit his belly. Lily sat in the shade with a book, pretending she wasn't listening to the music on her earbuds. Margaret was at my side on the little patio, wearing the big straw hat she liked, because it covered the scars along her hairline. She'd set her hearing aids lower than usual. She always did that when more than a couple of people were around. Too much noise tired her out. Dylan stood by the grill with a spatula in one hand and a beer in the other, acting like he'd invented hamburgers. He was in his element when there was an audience, even a small one. He was telling some long story about a client who tried to back out of a lease at the last minute. "So I looked this guy dead in the eye," Dylan said, flipping a burger with a little flourish, "and I tell him, 'You can walk if you want. But I've already got 3 other offers on the table, and your deposit is non-refundable.' You should have seen him. Total meltdown." Claire laughed, maybe louder than the joke deserved. "You're terrible," she said, but there was pride in it. Margaret leaned forward slightly, squinting. A car passed on the street, its stereo humming a bass line that muddied the words. "What did you say, dear?" she asked. "Something about a table." Dylan smirked. "I said he had a total meltdown," he repeated, raising his voice like she was a child who'd wandered off. Threw a tantrum. Like some people we know. He tilted his head toward Max, who had just refused to come out of the sprinkler. The joke landed wrong to me, a little meaner than it needed to be, but no one else seemed to notice. "And then," Dylan continued, turning back to his story, "the guy comes crawling back a week later." Margaret smiled, a beat too late. "Oh, yes, people can be so dramatic," she said, chiming in as if she'd heard it all the first time. There was a small pause around the table, the kind that happens when people aren't sure which script to follow. Dylan filled it with a laugh that had no warmth in it. "Margaret's on about a 5-second delay these days," he said, tapping his ear with the handle of the spatula. "We just have to send the signal and wait for it to reach the receiver." He made a clicking motion, like turning a knob. Claire snorted. "Dylan," she said, that drawn-out tone people use when they pretend to scold a dog that keeps jumping on guests. I watched Margaret's face. The flush rose from her throat to her cheeks. Her fingers went, almost automatically, to the little device behind her ear. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I thought I heard." "You're fine, Mom." Claire cut in, not looking at her. "Just wear the aids properly. You're embarrassing yourself." That stung worse than anything Dylan had said. My daughter correcting her mother for missing the punchline, instead of the man who'd sharpened it. Later, when we were loading dishes into the sink, Margaret lingered by the window. Did I answer off?" she asked quietly. "Sometimes I think I'm following, but then people look at me like I'm on another planet." "You did fine," I said. "He was just running his mouth." She picked up a plate, set it back down. "Maybe I am slowing down," she said, more to herself than to me. "I don't want to be a burden, Frank." "You are not a burden," I said, a little too sharply. She flinched, and I softened my voice. "You're my wife. That's not a burden. That's the job." If that had been the only time, maybe I could have tucked it away as a thoughtless remark. But small cruelties rarely travel alone. As the months went on, Dylan's jokes multiplied like weeds. He started with the hearing. "Margaret, I told you that last week," he would say when she asked him to repeat something. "You must have turned the volume down again. Want me to check your batteries?" He'd chuckle, and Claire would roll her eyes if I frowned. "He's just joking, Dad," she'd say. "Don't be so old-fashioned." That's how we tease. It wasn't just the hearing, though. Little by little, his focus shifted from Margaret's ears to our lives. One Sunday, he showed up with a glossy brochure from the power company. "Have you two thought about going paperless?" he asked, waving it like a salesman. "All these bills piling up in the mailbox, it's risky. Seniors are prime targets for scams." He sat at our kitchen table, logged into his laptop, and showed us how simple it all was. "I can set it up so everything goes through our portal," he said. "Then you don't have to worry about missing payments or getting confused." "I'm not confused," I said mildly. "I've been paying bills longer than you've been alive." He laughed, that patronizing laugh that makes your skin itch. "Relax, Frank. I'm just trying to lighten your load. By the time you're really going deaf, I'll have all this paperwork in hand. You can just enjoy your golden years." We didn't give him access. Not that day, but he kept nudging. "The yard is a lot, isn't it?" he'd remark, looking out at the overgrown hedges. "Big house, all those stairs. Have you thought about downsizing? You could sell while the market's hot and stash the cash. Claire and I could help you manage it. Make sure you don't get taken advantage of." Margaret, bless her, would say, "Oh, I like my kitchen. I know where everything is." She'd smooth her apron like a shield. Dylan would shrug, as if he were only trying to help. But later, I'd hear him in the hallway talking to Claire in a low voice. "Once your folks simplify things, we can finally think about that place in the Heights," he'd say. "You know how much equity is just sitting there. It's insane." I noticed, too, that for a man who was supposedly being groomed for partnership, Dylan was always talking about next quarter, or after the bonus hits. There was always a reason they were stretched thin for a few more weeks. Claire would mention a vacation they wanted to take, then laugh it off. "Would just need one good commission," she'd say. Then came the hints. One evening, she lingered after Dylan took Max out to the car. "Dad," she began, tracing the rim of her mug with a finger, "if you'd be willing to co-sign something small for us, we could really stabilize. Just a little line of credit. Dylan says it's silly not to leverage what you have." "What I have," I said slowly, "is a roof over your mother's head and enough money to keep the lights on. I'm not mortgaging that so your husband can play big shot." She flushed. "It's not like that. You always think the worst of him." "No," I said. But I paid attention when Margaret stopped wanting to go out to restaurants because she hated leaning across the table saying, "Sorry," while waiters and strangers looked at her like she was being difficult. I paid attention when she started saying, "I'm sorry, speak up," before anyone had actually mumbled, as if apologizing in advance for existing. And I especially paid attention the afternoon Dylan made one joke too many. We were all in the living room that day, the TV on low, some home improvement show playing in the background. Margaret tried to tell a story about a neighbor who'd fallen in her driveway. Halfway through, she lost the thread because someone on the TV hammered something loudly and her hearing aids fuzzed out. And then "Oh, I lost it," Margaret said, laughing at herself. "What was I saying?" "Something about Karen and the mailbox," I prompted. Dylan jumped in before she could regroup. "She's like a laggy internet connection," he said, grinning. "You talk, then you wait for the little spinning wheel. Eventually the page loads." I put my book down. "Enough with the hearing jokes, son," I said. I kept my tone light, but it carried. He rolled his eyes. "Geez, Frank, relax. It's how our generation shows affection. We roast each other. Builds resilience." "I've been resilient longer than you've been posting selfies," I replied. "And I don't remember my father's friends mocking my mother for things she couldn't help." Claire shifted on the couch. "Can we not do this?" she said. "He didn't mean anything by it." Maybe he didn't that day. Maybe he was just trying out a line, seeing how it played. But I saw the way his expression hardened when I pushed back. The gleam in his eye when he talked about our house, our equity, our position. Jokies. I was starting to realize, or how he tested the water. How far could he go? How much would we swallow? Every quip about Margaret's hearing, every comment about how complicated finances were for people our age, was a little nudge against the boundary. Not long after that, he stopped joking and started bringing papers. "Frank," he said one Saturday, unrolling a folder on my kitchen table, "I've got a banker friend you should meet. Simple guarantee, short term. Helps us lock in this tech hub deal I told you about. You'd barely feel it. We should sit down with him, talk numbers. You trust me, right?" By then, my discomfort had hardened into something else. I didn't have the full picture yet, but my gut had started whispering a word I hadn't wanted to put on my son-in-law's back. User. The signatures on those pages were still blank, but the line between jokes and intentions, that, I could see now, had been crossed a long time ago. The visit that set everything in motion didn't look like much at first. It was a Tuesday afternoon, a week before Thanksgiving, cold enough that my breath fogged when I stepped out to get the mail. I heard a car door slam and looked up to see Dylan walking up the driveway, hands in his coat pockets, head down like a man deep in thought. "Hey, Frank," he called, forcing a smile when he saw me. "You got a minute? Thought I'd check that patch on your roof before the snow hits." He never used to worry about our roof, but I just nodded and let him climb the ladder. He stomped around up there for all of 5 minutes, then came back down, dusting off his hands. "You're fine for now," he said. "We'll talk about long-term solutions later. Got a minute inside? There's something I've been meaning to show you." Inside, the house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. Margaret was in the den, listening to an audiobook with her eyes closed. Dylan steered me into the kitchen, as if he owned the place, and dropped a thick folder onto the table. "Okay," he said, rubbing his hands together. "I've got something big cooking, and this is the perfect chance for you to be part of it. Family and business. Win-win." I stayed standing. "You know I'm retired from business, Dylan." He chuckled. "You can take the man out of the game, but you can't take the game out of the man, right?" He flipped the folder open, revealing charts, glossy renderings, bank letters. "This is the riverfront tech hub I've been talking about. We're not just brokering leases anymore. The firm is buying equity in the whole redevelopment. Land, buildings, the works. This is the deal that makes partners." I looked down at the papers. I knew those silhouettes, those brick facades turned into glass and steel. They were the bones of the factory complex I'd bought for pennies on the dollar decades ago. Funny to see them dressed up in new clothes on expensive paper. "Big project," I said carefully. "The biggest," he agreed. "And here's where you come in. The bank just wants a guarantor on a $500,000 line. Short-term bridge financing. Collateralized against your house and savings, but it's basically no risk. We close the equity deal. The line gets paid back. You get a fat thank you check and lifetime bragging rights that you were in on the ground floor." He pushed a document toward me, tapping the signature line with one manicured finger. I didn't sit. I didn't pick up the pen. "Why me?" I asked. He blinked. "Because you're family," he said, like it was obvious. "And because you have what the bank wants, solid assets, no big debts, stable income. To them, you're like gold. They see an older couple with a paid-off house and pension checks. Their eyes light up." He laughed, then seemed to realize that maybe that wasn't the selling point he thought it was. "Look." He shifted. "This is for Claire and Max, too. We're talking about real generational wealth. College funds, summer homes, the whole thing. You help us now, and you'll be the hero of this family. We can finally get out of that cramped starter place and into a proper neighborhood. You can't tell me you're not tired of seeing your grandson in that tiny yard." He watched my face like a poker player trying to read a tell. "And if I say no?" I asked. He spread his hands, all wounded shock. "Why would you say no to your own grandson's future?" he said softly. "I mean, I get it. It's a lot of zeros on the page. But the risk is theoretical. The reward is very real. If you choose not to help, that's your call, but, well, Claire will be crushed. It's hard not to see it as you choosing your money over your family." My jaw tightened. There it was. The twist of the knife. "I don't make decisions with a gun to my head," I said. "Leave the papers. I'll read them. If it's as safe as you say, we'll talk after the holiday." He exhaled, frustrated. "The bank wants an answer by Monday, Frank. This isn't some little car loan we can drag out." "Then they should have come to me sooner," I replied. "I won't be rushed in my own kitchen." His eyes flashed. Just for a second. Then the charm slid back into place. Sure, he said tightly. Sure, think about it. Just think about what it looks like if you don't, yeah. Claire's been under a lot of pressure. We're trying to build something here. He gathered his things and left the folder on the table. When the door closed behind him, the house felt colder than it should have. That night my phone buzzed when I was washing dishes. A text from Claire. Dylan feels really disrespected you didn't even look at the papers, Dad. We're just trying to build something. It's not like we're asking for a handout. If you won't even sit down with us and a banker, maybe we need some space from all this negativity. Negativity. That's what she called my caution. I showed the message to Margaret after we'd gone to bed. She read it slowly, her lips moving. She's upset, she said. She thinks you don't believe in her husband. I don't, I answered. Not the way he wants. She sighed, staring up at the ceiling. I don't want to lose them, Frank. I don't want to lose Max. Her hand found mine in the dark, her fingers thin but strong. Maybe you could just talk to the banker, she said. You don't have to sign anything. Just hear them out. For her sake. A man who's on solid ground doesn't beg his father-in-law with tears in his eyes for a guarantee, I said. Something's off here. She turned toward me, eyes shiny in the dim light from the hallway. Just don't slam the door before you're sure, she whispered. Please. I promised her I'd be careful. I didn't know how careful I'd need to be. You know what happened at Thanksgiving. You heard the words he threw at us as he stormed out, sign the guarantor by Monday or forget about Christmas with your grandson. I thought that was the worst of it, until the next morning. I was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee gone lukewarm, when my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Claire. It was my bank app. Unusual activity detected on your account. Large online transaction declined. Please review. My stomach dropped. I thumbed it open. There it was in black and whitey, attempted charge, $8,000 and change, to a website with a name that sounded like a casino dressed up as an investment platform. Crypto this, Palace that. The card number was one I recognized. Not my main card, not Margaret's. The emergency card. I had opened that card 15 years earlier, right before Claire went off to college. For life and death only. I'd told her, putting it in her hand. Flat tire in the middle of nowhere, emergency room, that kind of thing. Not for shoes. Not for fun. She had nodded solemnly back then. Over the years, it had seen a tow truck, a surprise wisdom tooth extraction, a plane ticket home for a funeral. In the last few years, it had barely seen daylight. Now someone had tried to run nearly 10 grand through it in one go, on an offshore gambling site. The charge had failed because I'd always kept the limit low. Belt and suspenders habit. The system had caught it, flagged it, asked me to confirm. I stared at the screen. Claire wasn't a gambler. She hated casinos, said they smelled like desperation and bad perfume. She'd once scolded me for buying a lottery ticket, for fun. This wasn't her. My hands went cold. The time stamp on the alert was 20:13 a.m. A few hours after Dylan had peeled out of my driveway, shouting threats about Christmas and guarantor forms. I could picture it too clearly, him pacing in their kitchen, anger curdling into panic. Opening Claire's wallet. Spotting the old card, thinking, why not? Punching in the numbers, trying to spin 8,000 into 80, 80 into 500. A drowning man grabbing at whatever twigs he could see. The realization hit me like a crowbar between the shoulder blades. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a son-in-law who'd gotten carried away with dreams. This was an attempted theft. From me. Through my daughter. I set the phone down very carefully on the table. Margaret was in the next room, humming along off-key to a song on the radio she could barely hear. I listened to her for a moment, to that thin little thread of sound, and felt something in me harden. I built my life moving dangerous goods across state lines. Chemicals, fuel, things that could blow up a town if you didn't respect them. You learn to spot toxicity before it eats through the container. You learn that some loads you refuse, no matter how much money they offer. I knew what toxic was. It wasn't in my house. It was knocking on my door with a pen and a charming smile. I didn't call Claire. I scrolled past her name, past the photos of Max in his Halloween costume, and found the number I hadn't used in 6 months. The one I kept for when trucks rolled over in the night or contracts started to smell bad. When the voice answered on the other end, dry and familiar, I felt my jaw unclench for the first time in days. "Morning, Victor," I said. "It's Frank. I need you to open a file. We've got a situation." Victor Lane had the kind of voice you trusted before you remembered he was a lawyer. Dry, amused, just this side of bored. Like nothing you could bring him would surprise him anymore. He'd been drawing up my contract since before Claire was born. When I first bought a slice of weed-choked riverfront, for what most men spent on a used pickup. He was the one who worded the deed so tight a hurricane couldn't pry it open. "Frank," he said when he picked up, "I was starting to think you'd forgotten my number. That usually means my clients are either very happy or very dead." "Neither," I said. "Yet." He heard something in my tone. The joking edge slipped from his. "What's wrong?" I told him about the Thanksgiving blow-up, about Dylan's jokes, about the guarantor forms, and finally about the attempted $8,000 charge on the emergency card at 2 in the morning. By the time I finished, Victor wasn't amused anymore. "Okay," he said. Paper rustled faintly on his end. I could picture him already reaching for a legal pad. "First things first. I'm freezing every family-linked account I can touch. Emergency cards, joint lines, anything with authorization tied to Claire that leads back to you. If Dylan's desperate enough to roll the dice online, he'll try again somewhere else." "You think I'm overreacting?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. There was a low snort. "Frank, you know how many embezzlement cases I've handled that started with just a bridge loan from family. Your son-in-law isn't a hotshot hustler. He's a cornered thief who thinks you're his last lifeline." The words landed like a weight on my chest and then, strangely, like a release. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't toxic. I was seeing clearly. "What do you need from me?" I asked. He said. "And patience. I'm going to pull his credit, run his name through every database I've got, and put feelers out at his firm. You said he works at Garrison and Pike Commercial, right? Office on the riverfront. 43rd floor of the red brick conversion." I said automatically. Old habits. I knew every tenant in those buildings, even if they didn't know me. Victor made a thoughtful noise. "Interesting. Sit tight. I'll call you when I've dug up enough dirt to plant something in. And Frank, don't sign anything. Not a napkin. Not a birthday card. Not love, Dad on a check." I hung up feeling like someone had finally turned on a light in a long, dim hallway. 2 days later, Victor pulled into my driveway in a silver sedan that had seen as many years as my truck but wore them better. He stepped out in his usual uniform dark suit, wool overcoat, scarf wrapped once around his neck like it had somewhere more important to be. He carried a thick manila folder under his arm. The way it sagged made my stomach knot. Margaret was in the den again, so we went straight to the kitchen. Victor laid the folder on the table with a soft thump, then took off his glasses and cleaned them, buying himself a second before he started. "You want the good news or the bad news?" he asked. "I'll take whatever comes first," I said. "The good news is, freezing those accounts was the right move. There were 2 more declined attempts on that emergency card after you called me. Smaller amounts. Different online platforms. He was testing the limits." I clenched my jaw. Claire didn't do it," he cut in. "I'll stake my license on that. This smells like Dylan all the way. Now for the bad news." He opened the folder and turned it toward me. On top was a stack of credit reports peppered with red flags, late payments, maxed-out cards, personal loans from obscure online lenders with interest rates that made my eyes water. "Your son-in-law," Victor said, tapping a page, "is drowning. Negative net worth." Every card slammed against the ceiling. But that's not the worst of it. He slid out another document. This one had Garrison and Pike's logo on it. "I have a friend in their compliance department," he went on. Totally off the record. "You didn't hear this from me. There's a quiet internal investigation going on. Missing client escrow funds. Money that was supposed to be parked untouched. In trust accounts while deals closed." "How much?" My voice came out lower than I meant it to. "Right now they're looking at about $480,000. That doesn't quite line up," he said. "Multiple wires over 6 months to 2 shell companies with very creative names. Ownership traces back to Dylan through a Delaware LLC and a cousin's address. Classic sloppy fraud. The kitchen seemed to tilt a little. I gripped the back of the chair until my knuckles whitened. So that $500,000 he wants isn't for a home, I said slowly. It's a life jacket for a man who drilled a hole in his own boat. And he drilled it in the middle of your dock, Victor added. In your building. He pulled another sheet from the stack, a glossy flyer for the Riverfront Tech Hub. Renderings of polished concrete floors, co-working spaces, smiling people holding laptops. That sure thing project of his, Victor said. The one he wants you to guarantee. It's taking shape on Paul B-17 of the Nolan Riverfront Industrial Tract. Which, last time I checked, belongs to a little holding company we set up, 25 years ago? NRI Holdings, I said. The name tasted strange on my tongue after so many years of silence. Nolan Riverfront Investments, Victor confirmed. You're still the majority owner of the land and the shell that owns the structures. Garrison and Pike leases half a floor in Building 3. Dylan has been walking through your lobby, riding your elevators, and cursing your old-fashioned landlord for years without realizing the old man at his in-laws' table was that landlord. There was a bitter humor to it, but it didn't make me laugh. What about Claire's house? I asked. He keeps talking about leveraging assets. She swears they're fine, but… Victor's mouth tightened. He pulled out another document. This one had the county recorder's seal. You remember when you bought that bungalow on Maple for her? He asked, already knowing I did. Paid cash. We put it in a family trust with some very specific clauses, so no one could touch it without coming through you, I said. To make sure she and Max always had a roof. He nodded. Which is why this caught my eye. He pointed to a line on the deed of trust filed 3 months earlier. A second lien, $200,000, in favor of a private lender with a name that sounded more like a bar than a bank. Redstone Capital, I read. I've never heard of them. You're not supposed to? He said. They specialize in high-interest bridge loans for people who can't get credit anywhere respectable. According to this, Claire signed off on using the house as collateral. He flipped to the last page. 2 signatures sat there, neat as you please, Claire Nolan Collins and Dylan Collins. At first glance, it looked like her handwriting. But I'd seen my daughter's name on homemade birthday cards and school permission slips for 35 years. There was something off. The loop on the C too tight. Though a little too tall. Victor slid his reading glasses back on and leaned in. I sent a copy to a document examiner I trust, he said. Preliminary opinion is that Claire's signature was traced from another document and then cleaned up. Dylan's, on the other hand, is very much his own. And my hands shook. I sat down because my legs decided they didn't want to hold me anymore. So he took the house I bought for my daughter, I said, each word careful, and turned it into chips on his table. Without telling her. Without telling me. Victor didn't say yes. He didn't need to. Images flashed through my mind like photographs developing in a darkroom. Claire standing in that empty living room, hugging me and Margaret as she took the keys. Margaret kneeling in the front yard, pressing hydrangea cuttings into the dirt because Max deserves flowers. The way Claire's voice had wobbled on the phone when she'd said, "We're a little stretched this month, but Dylan has it under control." And over all of it, Dylan's laugh at my table as he mimed words Margaret couldn't hear. The jokes about her hearing weren't harmless. They were proof. Proof of how little he respected the woman who had given him access to all of this. To my daughter. To my grandson. To my work. He's been treating us like we're already dead, I said quietly. Like we're just numbers on a spreadsheet he can shuffle around. Victor closed the folder gently, as if it contained something that might explode. He's cornered Frank, he said. The auditors at his firm are scheduled to bring in an outside team in a couple of weeks. If that escrow hole isn't plugged by then, we're talking more than a pink slip. We're talking handcuffs. That guarantor he wants from you. That's his last shot at patching the books before the spotlight hits him. I looked around my kitchen. The same calendar Margaret kept by the phone. The same chip mug with my name on it. The same sturdy table where we'd eaten 1,000 quiet meals. You know, I said slowly. For months now, I've been listening to my own daughter tell me I was sabotaging her future because I wouldn't sign whatever her husband put in front of me. She said I was toxic, controlling, that I didn't believe in them. Victor studied me. And now I see it, I said. He didn't want my blessing. He wanted my name. He wanted my credit, my house, my savings, my reputation, all to hide the fact that he's been stealing from people who trusted him. I felt the anger rise again, but this time it was cold, not hot. Not the blind fury of the Thanksgiving table, but something sharper. Focused. He thought I was just a tired retiree who should be grateful for his attention. I went on. He thought the man in flannel at the head of the table was the whole story. I met Victor's eyes. Let's show him the rest of the story, I said. He wants in on a tech hub built on my land. Fine, let's invite him to a meeting with the owner. I want to see how he handles it when the old-fashioned landlord he's been cursing turns out to be sitting at the head of the boardroom. A slow smile spread across Victor's face. Not kind. Not cruel. Professional. He thought he had you pegged, Victor said. Let's see how he manages when he realizes he's been squatting in your house the whole time. He thinks he's the shark in this town, I replied. Time he learned he's been swimming in my tank. I looked down at the folder one more time, at the mess Dylan had made in the shadow of my work, and felt something settle into place. He thought I was just an old mechanic, I said. Let's see how he handles meeting his real landlord. When Victor closed the folder and looked at me over the tops of his glasses, I knew what he was about to ask before he opened his mouth. So, he said, what do you want out of this, Frank? Best case scenario for you. There was a time in my life when the answer would have been simple. Get my money back, keep my name clean, move on. Quiet settlements, handshakes in back rooms, nobody the wiser. But as I thought about Dylan miming words Margaret couldn't hear, about Claire calling me toxic for refusing to fund a lie, about the forged signature on that second mortgage, and the attempted midnight spin at a digital roulette wheel with my emergency card, something inside me had shifted. I don't want this quiet, I said. The words surprised even me with how steady they came out. If he'd come to me head down and told me he'd screwed up, if he'd asked for a loan and sworn to pay it back, maybe we could have done something in the dark. But he tried to rob me with my own pen. He laughed at my wife. He's using my daughter as a shield. No more shadows. Victor nodded once, sharp. You want him exposed. I want the truth exposed, I corrected. To Claire, to his firm. To anyone he's lied to. If the chips fall on his head, that's where they belong. He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin. Then we need more than documentation, he said. We need his words. His intent. On record. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a different folder, thinner, with my holding company's name on the tab. Do you remember the crisis clauses we built into Garrison and Pike's lease when they moved into your building? He asked. Refresh my memory, I said. He flipped it open to a dense page of legalese, then pointed. In the event of financial irregularities, insolvency, or material breach of good faith escrow practices, he read, landlord reserves the right to restructure tenant equity, assume controlling interest, or terminate tenancy at will subject to. He looked up. In plain English, if they start playing games with other people's money, you get options. You can buy in cheap. You can kick them out. Or both. I whistled softly. You buried that in there. You told me to protect you from other people's stupidity, he said. Looked like overkill at the time. Now, not so much. We spent an hour at that table drawing lines on a notepad, turning possibilities into a plan. On one side, what Dylan thought was happening. He'd bullied his father-in-law into signing a $500,000 guarantor. He'd plug his hole, the auditors would find nothing amiss, and he'd keep his job and his freedom. On the other side, what we would make happen. Step 1. Victor said, ticking off with his pen. Nolan Riverfront Holdings reaches out to Garrison and Pike as the global landlord and a strategic partner in the Tech Hub project. We express concern about rumors of escrow irregularities and offer a lifeline, a capital injection in exchange for a controlling stake. They're under the gun, I said. They'll take it. Exactly. And we don't need much. 51% will do. He tapped the paper again. Step 2. As part of this partnership, We invite their rising stars, people they see as future partners, to a private meeting with our investment board to discuss direct equity opportunities in the hub. We make sure Dylan's on that list, I said. We make sure Dylan is the list. Victor agreed. The email goes out from a holding company address he's never seen. Lots of flattery. Identified as a high potential asset. Ownership impressed with your aggressiveness. That kind of poison. I pictured Dylan's face reading those words. The way his chest would puff up. The way he'd brag to Claire over dinner. Step 3. Victor continued. We host the meeting in the main boardroom on the top floor of Building 3. Floor-to-ceiling windows, polished table, the works. I'll have our CEO, Karen, play the part of the mysterious owner's right hand. She's good at that. You, meanwhile, will be in the observation room. The what? He smiled. We built it years ago for investor pitches. One-way glass. You can see into the boardroom, they can't see you. We'll wire the room for audio and video. Everyone on our side will sign the appropriate consent forms. Dylan won't think to ask. He'll see a big table and big money, and assume anything he says is off the record as long as it flatters his hosts. I sat with that for a minute. The idea of watching my son-in-law preen and lie about me without knowing I was 10 feet away made my stomach churn. But it was the cleanest path to the truth. You don't have to push him, Frank, Victor said quietly, as if reading my thoughts. You don't have to trick him into anything. Just give him the stage. He'll hang himself with his own tongue. The next step was harder than contracts and clauses. It was going home to Margaret and telling her what needed to be done. She sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. I told her as much as I could without drowning her in numbers. The missing escrow funds, the forged mortgage, the attempted charge, the plan. Her eyes filled as she listened, not because she didn't understand, but because she did. She knew what it meant when lawyers started bringing thick folders and using words like fraud and criminal liability. He's Max's father, she said softly when I finished. Whatever else he is, he's that, too. I know, I said. That's what makes this so rotten. But if we don't stop him, Margaret, he'll ruin them both. He'll keep gambling with their lives until there's nothing left to bet. She looked down at her hands, the skin so thin now, I could see the blue veins beneath. I don't want our grandson to grow up thinking cruelty is normal, she murmured. Then she raised her head, and there was steel in her eyes I'd seen on the day. She signed the consent forms for her hearing surgery. You're not destroying him, Frank. You're just finally letting the truth do its work. We started to prepare, each in our own way. Victor set the legal wheels in motion. Within 48 hours, my holding company had executed the crisis clause, negotiated a fire sale price for a controlling stake in Garrison and Pike, and scheduled a strategic alignment session with the partners. I signed papers in Victor's office that quietly made me the man at the top of the organizational chart my son-in-law worshipped. At home, I went into the closet and reached for the back. Past the flannels, the faded jackets, the old leather coat I wore every winter, my hand closed on a garment bag I hadn't unzipped in years. The suit inside still held its shape. Dark charcoal 3-piece, tailored back when my shoulders were broader and my waist narrower. I tried it on. It hung a little looser now, but when I buttoned it, I saw an old version of myself in the mirror. The one who'd sat across from union reps and bankers and not blinked first. I polished my black boots until I could see the kitchen window reflected in the leather. I shaved close enough that the razor burn made my jaw tingle. Margaret watched from the doorway, an odd little smile at the corner of her mouth. I remember that look, she said. What look? The one you get before you go into a room and change the temperature, she said. Be careful, Frank. I will, I promised. I'm not 25 anymore. I'm not looking for a fight, just a reckoning. When the call went out from my holding company to Garrison and Pike, it didn't go to Dylan directly. It went to the managing partners. They were the ones told that ownership wanted to meet select directors considered for future equity. They were the ones given a short list with one name, Dylan Collins. 2 days later, my phone buzzed. Not my personal phone, the one nobody knew about but my lawyer and my old operations manager. It was the office line, Rerouted to my pocket for the first time in years. Karen, my CEO, came on the line. "We've extended the invitation," she said. He bit. Told his boss this was proof he was indispensable. Meetings set for Wednesday at 10. I didn't hear Dylan's side of that conversation with Claire, but I could imagine it. I could see him walking into their kitchen, waving an email on his phone. "This is it," he'd say, voice bright with triumph. "I told you I was on the radar. The owner wants to talk private equity. We're about to be rich. Your dad will have to eat his words." A Wednesday morning, the elevator carried me to the top floor of Building 3. The doors opened onto a quiet hallway carpeted thick enough to swallow footsteps. At the end was the boardroom, a long walnut table, 12 high-backed chairs, and windows that made the city look like a model train set. Karen met me outside the observation room, a small door disguised as paneling. She was in her 40s, sharp suit, sharper mind. "Audio and video feed are live," she said. "Everyone in our team has signed consent. Our counsel is on standby down the hall. You sure you want to be behind glass for this, not at the table?" "I've spent enough years at the table," I said. "Today I want to see him without him seeing me." The observation room was dark, lit only by the soft glow from a control panel. One wall was glass. Black from this side, transparent from the other. I sat in the chair facing it and put on the headphones. My own reflection stared back at me for a moment, an old man in a suit, lines on his face carved by more than just laughter. Then the boardroom door opened. Dylan walked in with that same strut I'd seen in my backyard by the grill, just dressed up in a more expensive suit. He looked around, trying to mask his awe at the room. He straightened his tie, adjusted his watch to catch the light, and took a seat where he thought a partner would sit, not at the head, but close. Karen entered a moment later, all professional polish. I heard her voice clear as a bell in my ears. "Mr. Collins," she said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming on such short notice. We've been watching your performance." He took her hand, smiling his salesman's smile. "Please," he said, settling into his chair. "Call me Dylan. I'm honored to be here. I've always said our firm should work more closely with ownership. We're on the same side, after all." From my chair in the shadows, I adjusted the headphones and leaned forward. He thought he was about to charm a nameless investor out of $500,000 and a slice of my empire. He thought I was the wallet. He was about to meet the man who owns the vault. From my side of the glass, the boardroom looked like a stage. Dylan sat near the center of the long walnut table, back straight, hands flat on the polished surface, as if it already belonged to him. The skyline glowed behind him through the windows, all steel and glass and promise. He kept glancing at his reflection, adjusting his tie, smoothing his hair. Karen settled into the chair at the head of the table, a slim folder in front of her, a glass of water at her elbow. Two other executives from my holding company flanked her, silent, professional. They knew their roles. I'd briefed them myself. "Dylan," she began, her tone warm and businesslike, "thank you again for making time. We've had our eye on a few directors at Garrison and Pike, and your name came up repeatedly. Aggressive deal-making, creative problem-solving, willingness to take calculated risks." His chest lifted almost imperceptibly at each compliment. He waved a hand modestly. "Well, he said, "commercial real estate is a jungle. You either hunt or you get eaten. I didn't get where I am by playing it safe." From the darkness of the observation room, I felt my lip curl. Where he was, according to Victor's folder, was about 3 inches from the edge of a cliff. Karen smiled politely. "That's exactly the kind of mindset our ownership appreciates," she said. "Before we talk structure, though, I need to ask a few questions. We're discussing a private equity partnership, not just a commission. We expect our partners to have skin in the game. Can you speak to your personal liquidity and your ability to participate financially?" Dylan didn't even blink. He leaned back a little, crossing one ankle over his knee like he was on a talk show. "Liquidity is not an issue," he lied smoothly. "I have access to significant capital. Family capital, primarily." "Family," Karen repeated, pen hovering over her notepad. "Parents? In-laws?" "In-laws," he said with a hint of amusement. "My wife's side. My father-in-law did well for himself back in the day. Old-school blue-collar stuff. Trucks, warehouses, that kind of thing. Nothing interesting. But he socked away a fair amount. To him, it's just numbers on a bank statement now. My hands knotted into fists in my lap. In the headphones, his voice sounded closer than it ever had at my dinner table. "And he's supportive of your ventures?" Karen asked. Dylan chuckled. Supportive might be a strong word. He's complacent. Honestly, he's basically senile. Sweet guy, but he doesn't understand modern finance at all. Keeps his money in low-yield accounts, worries about gas prices like it's 1985. Victor, standing against the back wall of the observation room, went very still. I could feel his anger radiating behind me like heat from an engine. Mine felt colder. "Senile," I repeated under my breath. "Oh, I don't mean drooling in a wheelchair," Dylan went on breezily, unaware that every word was being recorded in high definition. "He just doesn't track the details anymore. Signs whatever I put in front of him. I handle their utilities, their insurance. I mean, you should see the systems I've set up for them. They'd be lost without me." Karen tapped her pen once. "So if we required a guarantor for your participation," she said, "your father-in-law would be amenable." He smiled, all teeth. "He's just a walking signature at this point. I'm the brain, he's the wallet. He thinks I'm doing him a favor by keeping an eye on things. As far as he's concerned, paperwork is just paperwork." "And your mother-in-law?" one of the other executives asked. "Any concerns about her involvement?" Dylan gave a little snort. "She's barely aware of what's happening," he said. "Half deaf, bless her. Got her bell rung in some accident years ago. Sweet woman, but you could tell her you're selling the house and she'd nod and smile. They're on their last legs, honestly. Once they go, everything passes to my wife, and by extension me. I'm just accelerating the inevitable, you know. Accelerating the inevitable." I gripped the armrests so hard my fingers ached. Karen's smile had gone thinner now, almost brittle. "You mentioned risk earlier," she said. "We're in a period of scrutiny, shall we say, across the industry. Regulators looking hard at escrow practices. Can you speak to any challenges your current deals might present in that context?" For the first time, a flicker of caution crossed his face. Then he smoothed it away like a wrinkle in his shirt. "There have been some timing issues," he conceded. "You move funds around to keep deals flowing, sometimes wires cross at awkward moments. But I've got it handled. Worst case, I patch a gap with personal credit or family backing until auditors stop sniffing around. It's all temporary reallocations. I'm in control. Temporary reallocations." That's what he called stealing $500,000. "You're confident?" Karen said. "Will like confident." She opened her folder, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it across the table. "We're launching a high-yield vehicle tied directly to this hub," she said. "Small pool of insiders. Because of the nature of the deals, we require a secure guarantor, $500,000, backed by a high-net-worth individual with established assets. The structure is aggressive, but the projected returns are substantial." She let the implication hang there. "As an incentive," she added, "would be prepared to offer a personal signing bonus to you upon execution of the guarantor. Call it $500,000 as well. Direct to your account. Consider it a reward for bringing value to the table." In the headphones I could hear Dylan's breath catch. His pupils dilated, even from where I sat. That number was exactly what Victor had told me he needed to fill the hole in his firm's escrow. $500,000, he repeated slowly. "Guaranteed. Upon receipt of a properly executed guarantor from your father-in-law," Karen confirmed. "We don't move until we see his commitment in writing. No signature, no funds." He picked up the paper, scanning it just long enough to pretend he understood it. His hands trembled slightly with adrenaline, not fear. "And you're confident," he said, "that my name on this, with his guarantee behind me, is enough for your board?" Karen folded her hands. "That depends," she said. "Can you deliver his signature by tomorrow morning?" He leaned forward, grin back in full force now. "Don't," he said. "He won't even read it. He never does. I bring him dinner, say, 'Dad, can you sign this thing for Claire and me?' and he scribbles on the line. He trusts me. In his mind, I'm the responsible one." "In the dark," Victor murmured. "We've got more than enough." Dylan wasn't finished. "Honestly, He added, lowering his voice conspiratorially, I'm doing him a favor. He's terrified of numbers. Gets confused looking at a basic statement. The man counts cash with his fingers. You should hear him talk about the market, like it's some monster under the bed. He's out of step. The best thing he can do is let me deploy his stagnant capital before the dementia gets worse. He laughed, then, and tossed in the final insult without even realizing it was the one that would sear into me the deepest. And if his wife asks questions, he said, tapping his ear with 2 fingers, we just nod and pretend to shout. She won't catch a thing. It's almost funny sometimes. Almost funny. I took off the headphones for a moment. The sudden silence roared in my ears. My own reflection looked back at me from the glass, older than it had a week ago, but not senile. Not confused. Just tired. I put the headphones back on in time to hear Karen say, then we look forward to seeing that guarantor tomorrow. Bring it to our counsel's office on the 9th floor at 9 a.m. sharp. We'll be ready to move quickly. Dylan stood, nearly knocking his chair back in his eagerness. He shook her hand with both of his. You won't regret this, he said. I've been telling everyone, ownership doesn't know what to do with their assets. Glad to see there's some vision at the top after all. He left the room with a spring in his step, like a man walking toward a winning lottery ticket instead of a noose. Karen stayed in her chair until the door clicked shut, then turned her head slightly toward the glass. You okay? Her voice came through the headphones, softer now. I exhaled slowly. I've heard enough. Victor opened the observation room door behind me. Light from the hallway spilled in, breaking the cocoon of the dark. He just told a room full of lawyers and executives that he plans to defraud you and your firm? Victor said. On tape. While bragging about your impending death and your wife's disability. If a jury heard that, they'd convict him before lunch. I stood up, knees a little stiff, but my back straight. We're not there yet, I said. First, I need my daughter to see who she married, and I need him to think he's still winning. We let him come to my house tonight. We let him apologize with flowers and crocodile tears. We let him push that paper across my table. I'll play the doddering old man one more time. You're going to sign? Victor asked, brows lifting. I'm going to sign, I said. In front of my lawyer. On a copy we control. On a document he thinks is his salvation and I know is his confession. Tomorrow, at 9, he'll walk into your office believing he's about to save his skin. I want him to see exactly who pulls the rug out. Victor nodded slowly, a grim satisfaction in his eyes. You sure you can stomach his act tonight? I thought of Margaret's tears at the Thanksgiving table. Of Claire's text calling me negative and toxic. Of Max's little hands reaching for me when he ran, unguarded, across our lawn. I've swallowed worse, I said. If he wants a senile old fool, I'll give him one. Just for a few hours. As I left the building and stepped out into the crisp air by the river, I looked up at the brick facades of the complex. Men in suits moved behind the windows, little shadows against the glass. Somewhere up there, Dylan was probably already on the phone to Claire, spinning this as his big break. He thought he was bleeding the sheep. He had no idea the shark could smell his blood from a mile away. I adjusted my tie, feeling the weight of the day settle on my shoulders, and headed for my truck. Tonight, I said to myself as I turned the key in the ignition. I put on the mask he gave me. Dylan's BMW pulled into my driveway just after dark. I was sitting in the living room with the lights low, Margaret's hand in mine, listening to the old clock tick on the wall. When his headlights swept across the curtains, she stiffened. Do we have to do this? She whispered. Yes, I said. Just this one last time. The doorbell rang, not tentative, not apologetic, one firm press. I took a breath, let my shoulders sag, loosened my face into the vague, unsure expression Dylan liked to put on me in his stories, and opened the door. He stood there in a dark suit, tie loosened like he'd rushed over straight from work. In his hands was a bouquet of convenience store flowers, the plastic still crinkling at the stems. Claire was behind him, eyes red, mouth tight. Frank, he said, voice dropping into a low, contrite register. May we come in? I stepped aside without speaking. They moved past me into the living room, bringing with them a gust of cold air and cologne that made my nose itch. Margaret rose slowly from the couch. She'd put on her good cardigan, the one Claire used to say brought out her eyes. Dylan didn't walk, he performed. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and, right there on my worn rug, dropped to his knees in front of her. "Margaret," he said, his voice cracking just enough to sound rehearsed, but not quite enough to be real. "Mom, I am so sorry for the way I spoke to you on Thanksgiving. I was under a lot of stress with this deal, and I let it get to me. I haven't been myself." He held up the flowers like an offering. "You didn't deserve that. You are the heart of this family." Margaret's eyes filled instantly. She reached down, because that's who she is, and cupped his cheek. "Oh, Dylan," she whispered. "Stand up, dear, please. We all say things we don't mean when we're upset. Of course I forgive you." He let her help him up, let the flowers transfer to her hands. Then he turned to me, his face rearranging itself into a mask of humble regret. "And Frank," he said, "I owe you an apology too. I disrespected you in your own home. That was unforgivable. I hope we can put this behind us." I watched him for a long beat, then let my shoulders slump further. Let the air leak out of me in a weary sigh. "It's forgotten," I lied. "Family is family." Claire's breath hitched. She'd been watching me like a hawk, waiting to see if her show had worked. Relief washed over her features. "Thank you, Dad," she said quickly. "We don't want to fight with you. We've just been under a lot of strain." There it was. The pivot. Dylan cleared his throat, glanced at Claire, then reached into his jacket. He pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly into thirds, and a fancy pen with his firm's logo on it. "Since we're all good now," he said lightly, "maybe we could settle that little piece of business we talked about. The bank's breathing down our necks for this guarantor. If we don't submit it first thing in the morning, we lose the rate, the slot, everything. It's just a formality." He spread the document on the coffee table, smoothing it with the flat of his hand. The signature line at the bottom seemed to glow. "Just sign here," he said, sliding the pen toward me. "It says what we discussed. You back us, the line exists on paper, and I handle the rest." I bent over the paper and squinted, letting my brow furrow. "Print's awful small these days," I muttered. I patted my shirt pocket, then my pants. Must have left my reading glasses in the truck. "You don't need to read every line, Dad," Claire said, too quickly. "Victor will have drawn something up to protect you anyway. It's exactly what we talked about." "You trust Victor?" "I do trust Victor," I agreed. "And Victor always says I shouldn't sign anything without him present. Habit, you know. Old contracts. Bad backs. We've seen some things." Dylan's jaw twitched. He forced a chuckle. "Frank, I've got an 8:30 meeting downtown," he said, the patience leaking out of him. "I can't drag your lawyer into this tonight. It's just family paperwork. We'll be in and out." I straightened slowly and set the pen back down. "Then we'll do it first thing tomorrow," I said. 9 a.m. at Victor's office. He can notarize it. Make it official for your bank. You bring whatever you need, I'll bring my glasses." He hesitated, calculating. The clock on the wall ticked 3 beats. 9? He repeated. "That's cutting it close, but it'll work. I can run it from there to my other meeting." His eyes flicked to Claire. She nodded minutely. "Thank you, Dad," she breathed. "You're saving us. You have no idea." He put on the grateful son-in-law smile again. Hugged Margaret a little too hard, patted my shoulder like I was a favorite but slightly dim uncle, and then they were at the door. I walked them out. As I pulled the door toward me, I left it open just a crack. "I told you," I heard Dylan hiss in a low voice on the porch. "Push over." Old man didn't even read it. Easy money. Claire's answering giggle was soft and nervous, but it was there. The sound cut deeper than I was ready for. I shut the door and turned the deadbolt with a final, metallic click. Margaret stood in the hallway, cradling the wilted flowers like they were something precious. "Should I put these in water?" she asked. "Leave them," I said. "They'll die just fine on their own." The next morning our boots echoed on the polished floors of Victor's office tower. Margaret walked beside me, head-high new hearing aids humming faintly. Claire and Dylan were already in the conference room when we arrived. Dylan paced near the window, checking his watch every 30 seconds. Claire sat at the table, twisting a tissue in her hands. She looked younger without makeup, more like the girl who used to fall asleep in the back seat on long drives. Victor entered at exactly 9, a leather portfolio tucked under his arm. "Good morning," he said briskly. "Let's make this efficient. I understand there's a guarantor you'd like my client to sign." "Finally," Dylan muttered, flopping into a chair. "Yes, we're on a tight schedule. I need to get downtown for an investment board meeting. If we could just get Garrison's signature notarized." "In my office, we review before we sign," Victor said, opening his folder. "Especially when my client is assuming liability for $500,000. He picked up the document Dylan had pushed across the table and skimmed it, lips tightening. "Before we address this," he continued, "there are some preliminaries we need to cover about the collateral you've attached here. Specifically, the house on Maple and certain lines of credit." Claire frowned. "Our house?" she asked. "What about it?" Victor slid a document across the table, an enlarged copy of the recorded second mortgage. "Are you aware," he asked gently, "that there is a $200,000 lien on your home in favor of Redstone Capital?" She blinked, confusion giving way to dawning horror. "That's impossible," she whispered. "My dad bought that house for us. It's paid off. We don't." He turned the page so she could see the signatures. "This would suggest otherwise." She leaned in, stared at her name in neat blue ink, then recoiled as if she'd touched a hot stove. "That's not my signature," she said, voice breaking. "I never signed that. I never met anyone from Redstone." Victor looked at Dylan. "Funny thing," he said mildly. "Every expert I've shown this to agrees. It's a forgery. A good one, but a forgery." Dylan's face went mottled. "You're making this up," he snapped. "You and Frank cooked this up to scare us. You probably had someone fake that just to." Victor held up a hand. "Mr. Collins, I've also received notice of an attempted $20,000 charge to an online gambling site on an emergency card issued to your wife years ago. Declined due to a low limit, right after you threatened my client about Christmas. We traced the IP. It came from your home network." Claire's head whipped toward him. 20,000, she croaked. "Brad, what is he talking about?" Dylan slammed his palm on the table. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man," he spat at Victor. Then, pivoting to me, his eyes wild, "Frank, this is insane. He's twisting things. You know I'd never." "You didn't misplace those funds, Mr. Collins," Victor interrupted, voice like steel. "You stole them. From your client's escrow accounts. About 480,000 reasons for us to be sitting here today." Silence fell heavy and thick. Claire's face had gone completely bloodless. "Is that true?" she whispered. "Dylan, is that true?" He looked at her, then at me, then at the closed door. There was nowhere left to run. "I was going to fix it," he snapped. "If your father would just sign the damn paper like a normal parent, none of this would be a problem. The house, the cards, the transfers, they'd all be patched. No one would even know." He jabbed a finger at me. "If you don't sign, your daughter and grandson lose everything. Their house. Their life. Is that what you want on your conscience?" I felt something settle in me, heavy and immovable. "You used my daughter's house as chips in your game and my wife's disability as a punchline," I said quietly. "You tried to gamble my savings at 2 in the morning. You want me to fund that? No. I won't sign a cent, not to cover your crimes." His lip curled. "You can't do this?" he snarled. "I'm family. You stopped being family the moment you turned my name into your get out of jail card," I replied. Victor cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said. He pressed a button on a remote. The lights dimmed slightly. A projector descended from the ceiling. On the screen, an organizational chart blinked into focus. Nolan Riverfront Holdings at the top, branches snaking down to building ownership, then to Garrison and Pike, and finally to a little box labeled Dylan Collins, Director. At the top of the chart, next to Chairman and Majority Shareholder, was my name. Dylan stared, uncomprehending. Claire's eyes moved from the screen to me, to the suit I was wearing, to Victor, and back again. I don't understand," she whispered. "Dad, I own the riverfront," I said. "The land, the buildings, the shell that owns your firm's office. As of yesterday, through the crisis clause Victor wrote when you moved in, I also own 51% of Garrison and Pike. I am your husband's boss's boss." Dylan sank back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. "You're lying." he managed. You're just a mechanic. You drive a truck. I built trucks, I said. Then I bought the yards where they parked. You sat in my house, ate my food, and told people I was senile while you stole from clients under my roof. I picked up the phone in the middle of the table and hit a button. The speaker crackled. "This is Jenkins," came a man's voice. "We're in the conference room, Mr. Nolan." "Jenkins," I said, not taking my eyes off Dylan. "As majority owner, I've reviewed the preliminary forensic audit on Mr. Collins's escrow accounts. I believe we've seen enough to make a decision without waiting for the quarterly review." "Yes, sir," Jenkins said carefully. "What are your instructions?" "Effective immediately," I said. "Dylan Collins is to be terminated for cause. All system access revoked. Security is to escort him out of the building. His license is to be reported to the state board. And Jenkins, yes, cooperate fully with law enforcement. Every document, every wire, every shell company. We will be pressing charges." "No," Dylan breathed. "Frank, please. You can't." I hung up before he could finish. He exploded. 1 second he was in his chair, the next he was across the table, lunging at me, eyes wild. "You set me up," he screamed, spittle flying. "You ruined me. You vindictive old bastard. I'll kill you." Before he got within arm's reach, the side door flew open. 2 security men Victor had hired in advance stepped in, moving with practiced efficiency. One intercepted Dylan mid-lunge, slamming him face down onto the table, pinning his arms behind his back. The other produced plastic restraints and cinched them tight around his wrists. "Get off me!" Dylan shouted, struggling uselessly. Papers scattered, the guarantor form crumpling under his cheek. Claire leapt to her feet. "Stop it!" she screamed. "You're hurting him." "Dad, make them stop!" "Call them off." "He just threatened my life in a room full of witnesses," I said, my voice flat. "They're doing their job." She turned on me then, eyes blazing, tears streaking her mascara. "You chose your money over your family," she spat. "You could have covered this. What's $500,000 to you? Pocket change. But you'd rather see him in handcuffs than help your own grandson's father." "He chose crime over his family," I answered, wary to the bone. "I'm not sending an innocent man to jail, Claire. I'm stopping a thief from dragging you and Max down with him." The door opened again. 2 uniformed police officers stepped in, faces impassive. Victor handed one of them a slim file. The recordings from the boardroom. Copies of the forged mortgage, the audit summary. "Mr. Collins," one officer said, hauling him upright. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft." As they led him toward the door, Dylan twisted to look back at me, eyes full of a hatred so pure it was almost empty. "This isn't over," he hissed. "Oh, yes," I said softly. "It is." The door shut behind them with a heavy click. The room felt larger suddenly and somehow smaller. Claire stood there, shaking, arms wrapped around herself. "I hate you," she whispered. "You destroyed my life." "No," I said. "He did that the first time he decided someone else's money belonged to him. I just turned on the lights." She made a strangled sound, grabbed her purse, and bolted from the room. Margaret watched her go, tears in her own eyes, then turned to me and took my hand. The hardest work was done. The fallout was just beginning. Time has a way of sanding the sharp edges off even the worst days, but some sounds stay with you. For me, one of them is the click of the handcuffs closing around Dylan's wrists. The other is the judge's voice, months later, reading out the sentence: 8 years for fraud, embezzlement, and identity theft. I didn't go to the trial. Victor went in my place. He sat in the back and watched as Dylan's lawyer tried to paint him as a man under pressure who'd made some bad choices. The jury didn't buy it. Neither did the judge. Victor told me later that Dylan didn't cry when they said, "guilty," or when they mentioned the victims whose escrow accounts he'd raided. He only lost his composure when the bailiff took his watch and cufflinks. That seemed about right. Claire lost the house on Maple. We sold it to make the firm's books whole. The hydrangeas Margaret had planted went with it. For a while, Claire wouldn't answer my calls. The last words she flung at me in Victor's office: "I hate you, you destroyed my life," hung between us like smoke. She moved with Max into a 3rd-floor walk up on the edge of town. A tired little building with peeling paint and a laundry room that ate quarters. The BMW was repossessed within a fortnight. The friends who'd loved their parties stopped calling. The women who'd clinked glasses with her over brunch had suddenly gotten busy. I heard about it all indirectly. A neighbor who'd seen her at the discount grocery. A former colleague of hers who mentioned, in a careful tone, that Claire was getting back on her feet. Pride can be a heavy thing, even when you're carrying a child and a dozen grocery bags up 3 flights of stairs. Months passed. Birthdays came and went with cards sent through Victor's office, because Claire had blocked my number. We paid Max's school fees directly, made sure he had a winter coat at the lost and found office for whoever needed it. The principal knew, even if he pretended he didn't. Then, one gray afternoon, my phone rang. Victor's number. "Frank," he said, "Claire's in my waiting room. She's asked to see me about paperwork." "Not money." "What kind of paperwork?" "Divorce," he said. "And a name change." He handled that part. I stayed out of it. It wasn't my place to sit across from my own daughter while she signed away a marriage I'd watched her sprint into. When it was done, he told me she'd cried, quietly, but her hand hadn't shaken when she wrote, "Claire Nolan," at the bottom of the forms. A few weeks later, on a Saturday that smelled of damp leaves and chimney smoke, a bus stopped at the corner of our street. I watched from the front window as Claire stepped down, one hand gripping the rail, the other clutching a canvas bag. No car, no stroller. Just her and a long walk up the hill. She looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner. The expensive haircut had grown out into something plainer. Her coat was warm but cheap, the kind you buy second-hand and are grateful for. She paused at the foot of our driveway, squared her shoulders, and walked up. When I opened the door, she didn't rush into my arms. She didn't look around the hallway with the critical eyes she'd had in recent years. She stepped just inside and stopped. "Hi, Dad," she said. Her voice was husky, like she'd been talking to too many strangers all day. "Hello, Claire," I answered. Margaret came in from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Sweetheart," she murmured. Claire didn't hug her, not right away. Instead, she did something I'll never forget as long as I live. She went down onto her knees on the worn rug, right there in the hall, and bowed her head. "I need to say this down here," she said when Margaret tried to pull her up. "I need you to hear me." She looked up at her mother, tears already spilling. "I am so sorry," she choked out. "That night, when he laughed at you, when he made fun of your hearing, I sat there. I sat there and I laughed. I let him treat you like you were broken, like you were stupid, and I didn't say a word. I was afraid of him. I wanted to keep the peace. I forgot what you did for me on that highway. I forgot who you are." Margaret knelt down, cupped her face like she was still 8 years old with skinned knees. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "Get up. Please. I forgave you a long time ago." The Claire stood then and turned to me. Her hands were shaking, but when she reached into her bag, they were steady enough to place 2 things on the little table by the door: a credit card and a set of keys. The emergency card, the spare house keys for Maple. "I don't need these anymore," she said. "I cleared out the house before the sale. I paid for a cleaning crew with the money I got from selling my handbags." She gave a humorless little laugh. Seemed like the least I could do. She pushed the card forward with one finger. "Cancel it," she said. "I won't use it. I don't want a safety net I didn't build." It just kept me from seeing how far I'd fallen. I picked up the card. Took the scissors from the drawer. Snipped it clean in half. She watched without flinching. "I don't want your money, Dad," she went on. "I want your respect back. I'll earn it." I believed her. We made coffee. She told us in pieces about the last months. About applying for job after job with a resume that said homemaker for the last 5 years. About finally landing a part-time shift stocking shelves at a supermarket. About the ache in her feet, the sting in her pride when women she used to know came through her line and pretended not to recognize her. "They promoted me to shift lead last week," she said, a little light creeping into her eyes. 50 cents an hour more. "They said I show up, I work hard, I don't complain. It's the first thing I've gotten in a long time that wasn't because of who I married. That 50 cents is worth more than all of Dylan's bonuses put together," I said. "Because you earned it with your own 2 hands. We set boundaries that day, clear and sharp. You can't move back in here," I told her. "I won't pay your rent. I won't bail you out when the car needs tires. She nodded. I know. But Max is my grandson, I added. I'll cover his school fees. I'll make sure he has clothes, a lunch, a dentist. I'll do it directly. Through the school, the doctor, the store. Not through you. Not because I don't trust you, but because I won't let anyone ever again use that boy as leverage. A tear slid down her cheeks, but she didn't argue. That's fair, she said. I want him to see me work. I want him to know where things come from. These days, Max spends every other weekend in my garage, turning bolts with hands that are still too small for the wrenches. He's learned how to change the oil in my truck, how to patch a bike tire, how to listen to an engine and hear what's wrong. We don't talk about his father much. When we do, I tell the truth in words a child can carry. That mistakes have consequences, that taking what isn't yours hurts more than just the person you took it from, that sometimes loving someone means walking away. Margaret got new hearing aids, the best we could find. Tiny things with more technology packed into them than the first trucks I drove. The first day she wore them, we sat on the porch as the sun went down. A cardinal landed on the fence and started to sing, a bright, insistent trill. Her hand shot to mine. Frank, she whispered, eyes wide. Do you hear that? I do, I said. I haven't heard that clearly in 10 years, she said. It's so beautiful, she cried then. Not from pain, but from relief. From being let back into a world she'd been pushed out of, one cruel comment at a time. My hearing may be damaged, she said later, wiping her eyes. But at least I finally know whose voices to listen to. People like to say money is the root of all evil. I don't think that's quite right. Money is a magnifying glass. It makes people more of what they already are. Dylan had greed and contempt in him long before he knew I had anything worth taking. Money just gave him sharper teeth. Claire had kindness and grit in her. Comfort smothered it for a while. Losing everything peeled it back to the surface. In the end, it wasn't the size of my bank account that saved us. It was the spine to say no to my own child when she asked me to sign away my future to cover her husband's crimes. It was the willingness to be called a monster rather than watch my family be slowly hollowed out by a parasite. The only inheritance worth fighting for isn't a house or a trust fund. It's the knowledge that you can stand on your own, that you can draw a line and keep it, that your worth isn't measured in zeros, but in the way you look at yourself in the mirror. If you've listened this far, maybe you see a little of your own life in mine. Maybe you've felt that twist in your gut when someone calls cruelty a joke, when a simple signature suddenly feels very complicated. Let me ask you, if your own child or in-law tried to use your savings and your home to cover up their crimes, would you be willing to involve the police, even if it meant sending them to prison? Have you ever realized, too late or just in time, that someone's jokes about your age or your health were really a way to make you feel small, or to soften you up for something they wanted? Do you think money reveals a person's true nature, or does it change them? I'd like to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me if you've ever watched someone mock an elder's disability or push for just a signature that didn't sit right. And if this story hit a nerve, if you believe that respecting the people who built your life matters more than any quick buck, then stick around. There are more stories like mine. Stories about justice that comes late but still comes, about families torn open and stitched back together with something stronger than before. In the end, the numbers in your account fade. The names on the deeds change. The only inheritance you can't spend, and the only one no one can steal, is your integrity. Guard it like your life depends on it, because one day it might.